I'm Chelsea Hart, and I'm here to talk to you about solar power. It's been in the news recently, well, for the past several years. We've been talking about fossil fuels and how we need to separate ourselves from them and seek alternative energy sources for a multitude of reasons that I won't cover because it's irrelevant. But in looking for these alternative energy sources, if we're going to approach it from an environmental perspective, we have to consider more than just monetary costs. So it is my claim that residential solar energy systems fail to recover their costs. Those three costs that I'm addressing today are the hidden health costs of the production of the solar energy systems, the environmental costs of gathering the materials and creating the solar energy systems, and the financial cost in installing the systems themselves. So my first point is that there are hidden healthcare costs when it comes to producing these solar energy systems. The first cost is that the workers are overexposed to silicon dust particles during production. Dustin Mulvaney, an environmental studies professor at San Jose State University, and he has his doctorate in chemical engineering, said that the U.S. Occupational Safety and Health Administration has set exposure limits to keep ambient dust levels low and recommend the use of respiratory masks. But it has been suggested that despite the use of respiratory masks, workers remain overexposed to silicon dust. And it's obviously bad to inhale silicon dust. It's bad to inhale anything that's foreign. The second health cost is that there is a chemical created as a byproduct of one of the processes of making the silicon called silane gas. And silane gas is very toxic and also very caustic, and it's combustive. So there have been, according to David Biello, who writes for Scientific America, of all the toxic or reactive molecules that the solar industry uses, silane has been involved in 10 fatalities in the last 20 years. And 10 doesn't sound like a very big number in the past 20 years, but if you look at the timeline of solar energy, the production of it has only been around for around 20 years. And a death is still a death. That's still a very big cost. All right, my second supporting claim is the hidden environmental costs of this supposedly green alternative energy source. Through the production of solar panels, they create what's called an energy debt of 3 to 5 years. That means that the amount of energy put into this system through fossil fuels the mining and the creation, they create they need to repay their energy to the earth, sort of metaphorically, but it takes them 3 to 5 years to pay themselves off. Also, they're highly inefficient. There is the EROEI, which is the energy input versus the energy output of solar panels. It's one of the least efficient energy sources. It has the photovoltaic solar panels, which are the most common for residential solar energy systems, has a 1.9 EROI score, which means for every 1 unit of energy put into creating these solar panels, you're only receiving 1.9 units of energy back. This is below the economic threshold established by D. Weizsäcker, a German engineer, he pretty much created and is making the EROI number more concrete. So there's that. Just for a comparison, coal's EROI number is 80, and the most efficient alternative energy source is hydroelectric with a score of 100. So every 1 unit of energy that goes into these things, they return over 100%. They're returning back a large amount of energy. Also, California's solar industry produces 46 million pounds of toxic waste a year. That's a very large amount of waste, and there's not really a way to store it inside of California, so we have to transport over 50% of it out of state. The transportation costs use fossil fuels, which is what we're trying to avoid. And when it is transported, the fossil fuels used to transport the waste aren't even considered or even counted into the carbon footprint. And Jason Dearson said the fossil fuels used to transport that waste is not typically considered in calculating solar's carbon footprint. So it makes solar power seem a lot cleaner than it actually is. My final point is that the financial cost of the system itself makes it an inefficient source of alternative energy if we are going to consider the monetary costs. The Energy Informative says that the systems cost anywhere from $10,000 to $40,000. You must own your own property, and you must own your own property in a sunny state. So sunny states tend to have higher property value, like California, Florida, and all that. And the system requires maintenance over time, which also uses more fossil fuels, uses more materials, and like that. Alright, so as a reminder, my claim is that residential solar energy systems fail to recover their costs due to the three costs, which are the health costs, the environmental costs, and the monetary costs of the systems themselves.
All right, Chelsea, the topic identification is fine. I think you should just start with the background stuff. That's your attention device. That'll work a little bit better. You have a clear statement of your proposition, an excellent layout of what the supporting structure is going to be. You signpost those points as you get to each of them in the body of the speech, so it's very easy to follow that. I also appreciated the explanation that you had on the individual points. I do think sometimes, though, that you just rely on the explanation without providing the follow-up proof. For example, there's no measurement of what the impact is from the silicon dust or except for the deaths and the explosions, any other health risk that's been mentioned on that first point. So it's a little bit hard to assess how big an impact that is. There are a couple of places where you don't give us a source citation. For instance, you say 50% of the waste has to be transported out of state, and I'm not saying that that's not true. It probably is true. It sounds like you got it from someplace, but you don't tell us where you got it from. The follow-up quote I thought was more appropriate, and that supported your point. On the last point, you had no evidence about the maintenance issue, no estimate of what the costs were on those kinds of things. But I did think that you did a pretty good job explaining what the initial costs would be, explaining how some of these things might be measured. Your EROI score was a little bit confusing because to me, 1.9, 1.9, that sounds like 100%, which is the same as you're getting from hydroelectric. If there's a different way that that's being compared, you need to explain that a little bit more clearly, because I wasn't quite sure why that meant that solar was ineffective. Even though you provided some good evidence on that particular point, I didn't think it explained it very clearly. So most of my criticism has to do with either the clarification of the evidence or the lack of citation of the evidence. Otherwise, I thought everything was pretty solid. Thank you.